What is up, you guys? Welcome to Illumination Lab. My name is Justin, and today I'll show you how I quickly made this underwater scene in Cinema4D and Redshift. In this video, I'll show you how I brought in the assets, the lighting I use, and the steps I took to bring it all together. I'm excited to show you guys this one. It's going to be a fun one today. So without further delay, let's get into it. Alright, so references. So with our references today, I do have these 3 references that I used. With this one, it was a little bit different. Instead of actually using some of the elements from the references, I primarily use these as far as the lighting purposes go. Just because sometimes with underwater scenes, it can be a little bit more tricky to help really portray that you are actually underwater and you're not you're not outside of the water, or you're not trying to portray some sort of stylized look. And so when I decided to create the scene here, I wanted to make sure that I did have some references as far as the lighting goes. And then, of course, with some of these, they have some nice plants incorporated, and then also looking at composition as well too. So primarily with these references, it's just lighting, some of the compositions, and then some of the plants as well too, but a little bit different than our typical references. Normally with our references, we will sometimes use those elements within the references to kind of replicate ourselves within the scene. We use those elements of these references here. So that's it for the references today. Let's hop into Kitbash and bring in some assets. All right, hopping into Kitbash today, we are actually going to go over and select this Elysium kit here. What I like about these is it is very Atlantis-esque, if that made sense. It's very regal and elegant, and so I wanted to do something like this to help convey a underwater, almost like an Atlantis theme here. And so as you guys can see, they have tons of different buildings and rooms, and so you have a citadel here, a coliseum, a temple. And so today I think I actually am going to use a temple asset here, just because it kind of gives us a good idea of a representation of the structure, and it also has a kind of a unique look in general. It's very long, and so I feel like a building that is a little bit longer will kind of soak up most of our composition within some of our renders here. And so I selected this one just because of that, and it does look a little bit different versus some of the other ones. So I thought that was something that would be fun to use and see what kind of looks we can get out of it. So I'm just going to import this here. I'm going to hop into Cinema4D. I'm going to go to the extension tab and then select cargo. Again, since I'm using Redshift, I'm going to select our Redshift standard material and connect to cargo here. And then as I zoom out, we can see our asset here, and it's looking pretty good. So next up, what I'm going to do is actually go back into Kitbash here. I think adding in some small elements will kind of help complete the building a little bit more. So I'm just going to bring in this small planter here, and then I'm just going to look around for a few different ones that could be cool. And this marble lamp is actually kind of unique. So especially too, if we can align these lamps down the temple that we have, I think that would create a pretty cool look here. So hopping back into Cinema4D, I'm just going to take this lamp here, and then I'm just going to adjust it to this line that they have here. Now I'm going to take this lamp and then just copy and paste and then put it over here on this other side. And then I'm just going to grab a null here. I'm going to rename it temple and then just put all of our assets within the null here. And then I'm just going to select the null, and then we're going to shrink this down just to make sure that this is going to be to proper scale when we are bringing in some of our other assets here. So now I'm just going to go into grayscale gorilla here. I'm going to bring in a L curve, and then again I'll just shrink down the temple here just so again it's kind of fitting within our scene here. If you're not familiar with what I'm doing with the L curve, I typically will bring in some sort of curve here to establish some sort of scene or some sort of boundary within the scene, and then sometimes I will change that depending on the scene. It all just kind of depends on what I'm working on. So sometimes I leave it and kind of cover it up with different assets. Sometimes I completely remove it, but I bring this in just again to create a boundary within the scene. Next up, what I'm going to do is I always like to bring in a Redshift camera. The reason why I bring in a Redshift camera is I can actually set up our initial composition of our shot here, and then I can kind of bounce in and out of our Redshift camera and our default camera. So when I eventually bring up the Redshift render view, I can kind of pop the render view into our camera and get a real-time feedback of what our scene is looking like within our first composition here. All right, so next up we have to grab some materials. So I'm just going to jump back into Kitbash here, and then I'm just going to find some cool rock and soil materials. And so I'll just download a few of these and just import it into our scene here. And then once I have all of these downloaded, what I'll do is just jump back into Cinema4D and we'll get this going. All right, so back into C4D, what I'm going to do is just bring in a landscape here. And what I'll do with this landscape here is I'll shoot up our roughness and our fineness, and then our depth segments and width segments, just to kind of give it a little bit more detail here. And then I'll do the same thing with our other landscape here. And then with this one, I'm just going to rotate this one and then apply it to this curve here. And then that will kind of be the backdrop of our scene here. So my goal with this one is to kind of surround this temple with a lot of different rocks, and so it's almost like it's kind of hidden away at the bottom of the ocean, or just kind of tucked away between a whole bunch of different rock structures. So I'm just going to kind of play around with this landscape we have here, and then really just kind of adjust it to the curve. And then to make things simple, what I'll just do is just copy and paste and then kind of adjust our landscapes here to our back wall here. And so that's looking pretty good so far. Now I'll just copy and paste this landscape here again, but with this one will be a little bit different. And then at this time, I'll also pop up the Redshift render view as well, just because when we're starting to play around with our different colors and textures here, do you want a real-time feedback of what it's looking like. So I'm just going to pop that open here, and then with our landscape, what I'm going to do, I'm just going to go over and select spherical, and then immediately you can see that it made it a little bit more of a, almost like just a sphere with some sort of either tessellation or just distortion in general. And then I'm just going to adjust and play with some of these settings here, and as I kind of bring down the roughness and the fineness of this, you can see what kind of effect that it makes within the landscape here. So I'm just going to make it so it appears rocky here, but it's not too fine. It's something that is going to be somewhat similar to a actual rock or a boulder formation here. So I think leaving that like that is going to be good for now. And then what I'm going to do now is just bring in a dome light here, and then I'm just going to go over and select a somewhat of a darker blue here, and then I'm just going to play around with the exposure just to see what it looks like exactly. And then what I'm going to do is bring in a spotlight here, and then with this spotlight, it's going to kind of simulate some of the different light that is eventually coming in through the water. And then I'll just kind of adjust it to our temple here, and then I'll just kind of play around with our cone angle here, and then our fall off as well. And so sometimes playing with some of these settings, you can kind of create a cool look. And then of course we can increase our exposure, and then what I'm going to do is hop into Grayscale Gorilla, and they have some pretty cool caustic gobos here. So I'm just going to apply a caustic gobo here and see if we can really get that water effect that we're looking for. And so immediately within the Redshift render view, you can kind of see that we have more of a, almost like a texturized light here. It kind of brings more of a underwater feel. And then of course with our dome light we kind of created a darker blue look to again replicate more of an underwater scene. And then what I'll do is I'm just going to go back into Kitbash, and then I'm just going to bring in some sort of stairs here. The reason why I'm bringing in some random stairs is I want it to be more of like an underwater ruins type thing. I did think about possibly removing this at the ends of creating this, but I eventually wanted to create some sort of ruin-esque look here. And so even though the stairs isn't necessarily the same style or the same look as our temple that we have, I just wanted to kind of create some sort of variation within the scene, or some sort of, you know, I guess mystery within the scene of either what's going on or what happened within the scene. And so sometimes if we can not just create something that looks aesthetically pleasing, but if we can also try and tell a story within the scene, it kind of amplifies the effect of what you're going for, or even add another layer of meaning within your renders. So all right, so next up, I'm just going to copy and paste our landscape that we had that was more of a boulder formation, and then I'm just going to kind of apply it to our back wall here. And then I'm just kind of playing around with it just to kind of create some sort of variation that looks organic, but at the same time, you know, doesn't look too funky at all. And so now next up, I'm just going to copy and paste our landscape as well. And then I'm just going to adjust it to the top of our scene here. Really with this, I'm just kind of playing around with the different lighting effects eventually through this, just because it's gonna almost simulate rocks being above the temple. And so some of the light can come through and then some of it is blocked by the structure that we're making. And so this is something, again, I was thinking about taking out, but at the same time too, I didn't know, besides our original composition, what other render shots would look cool. So if we could have some sort of ceiling, that would sometimes work within the shots. And so sometimes if you don't actually make a ceiling and you're playing around with different camera angles when you're trying to render a specific look, sometimes you kind of actually need a ceiling, and so you'll have to go back and apply that there. So I'm just going to set this up here. And then also, besides the spotlight, we are blocking out some of our dome light from the top, and so that's going to help create some really nice shadows. And then we can kind of control some of our lighting, which is going to be our highlights. So if we can really stretch to have like some deep darks all the way to some really bright lights as well too, that can help kind of create some really cool contrast within the scene. Now what I'm going to do is just copy and paste our spotlight here, and then I'm just going to apply a blue color to it, and then just kind of line it up similar to our original spotlight, but somewhat offset. And so if you look at it closely, you can kind of see the white light being applied to, you know, the surface here, but then around the edges you could kind of see a nice touch of blue. So I was hoping with that it could kind of create more of a realistic look as far as what the lights might look like at the bottom of the ocean, with some white lights and then some hints of blues within there. And then lastly, I'll bring up another spotlight here, and then I'll just apply some sort of yellow tint to it, just to replicate more of a warm sun look. And so I'll just kind of apply that to some of our other lights here. And then so we get the nice yellow, the blue, and then our white light as well. So sometimes, again, creating that variation can kind of really bring in some more realism into your light there. All right, so next up, I have to make a ground. And so with this one, I'm just going to bring in another landscape here, and then just kind of play around with the seed and see, you know, what kind of effects we can get. And then similar with this one, I'll just copy and paste it and move this landscape over. Okay, so that's looking pretty good so far. What I'm going to do is bring in a Redshift environment, and then I'm actually going to make it a little bit more of a blue tint here. And then as I play around with some of the settings here, what I'm really going for is somewhat of a darker look in the back. And so I'll just adjust it here so it's a little bit more lighter up front in the foreground here, and then in the background area you can kind of see to our right here that it's a little bit darker. So the reason I'm doing that is, again, this is going to be somewhat in almost like in the bottom of the ocean, and so I want to make sure that, you know, within our scene here, we are focusing on the temple, but in the background, you could kind of see that there's a little bit more darkness within the scene in the back. So. And then again, I'm just kind of playing around with these landscapes here and just kind of really building up the scene. And then what I'm going to do is just kind of copy and paste these spotlights here. And then what I'll do is adjust these spotlights to this background here so we can kind of see a little bit more, some different lights hitting the scene. And then I'm just gonna adjust it so we can have a few different light sources. And then for underwater scenes, I think lighting is extremely important, not just like illuminating your scene like anything else, but I think the lights also really help create that atmosphere that you're trying to go for. So having, again, a few different lights or different light sources or even light colors will help you kind of convey whatever look that you're really trying to go for. So I'm just going to take this area light here, I made it into a sphere, and then I'm just going to do somewhat of a darker blue here. Now, next up, what I'll do to really get a better understanding of what our scene's going to look like, I'm just going to apply some of our colors and textures to our landscapes here, and then we'll kind of see what look that will create here. Okay, so immediately you can see that, you know, it looks a little bit more realistic as far as a underwater scene goes. We do have some scaling issues initially, and then what I'm going to do is just bring in a Redshift tag for all of these and turn on displacements. And then by adding in a Redshift area tag and turning on that displacement, that's going to create more of a realistic look with having that displacement on our landscapes here. So now that we do have our materials on, you can kind of see that our lights pretty much dissipated quite a bit, just because there's not much light textures to kind of bounce off of. And so typically if you're working within a texture that is a little bit lighter or has some sort of white to it, it can kind of bounce off of that a little bit better versus something that has somewhat of a darker color. And so you can see that within the Redshift render view here that it is darker, but we did not play with our lighting here. So what I'll have to do is just go back into our lights here and then just increase the exposure, and then immediately you can kind of see a more pronounced look from our lights here. And really I'm just kind of playing around with these, just kind of seeing what look I can get. Again, this is kind of up to you guys what kind of look you want, but I'm trying to go more for like a darker look here, and so I'll just kind of play around with these and kind of see what we can get from here. Also too, this scene is kind of lacking some sort of of vegetation, and so I'm just going to jump back into Kitbash here and then kind of look at a few of these different plants and different models here. And so what I actually think would be really cool for this scene is since we do have a building that is a little bit more mystic or a little bit more like a stylized look, maybe bringing in some sort of plants that kind of portray that themselves. And so this enchanted tree looks pretty good, so what I'll do is just import that. I don't know if we'll actually use that, but that's one of the ones we'll just try out in the scene and see if we like it. I think a cherry blossom would look pretty cool, again, to add in that mysticism that comes with our building here. And so if we can kind of create that within the whole scene, I think that would really make it a little bit more interesting. And then even having this hanging ivy would be pretty cool too, just to have it around the building. So I'm just going to bring some of those in here, and then I'll also bring in a few of these grass patches as well, just to kind of sprinkle throughout our ground here to, again, just kind of create a little bit more life and vegetation within the scene. All right, so immediately coming back to our scene, we do have a ton of assets here, so I'll just kind of move those off to the side. And then first up, I'll play around with this ivy here. So I'm just going to scale it down to our building here. And then I'm just going to apply it to some of the corners of this temple here. And so I'll just kind of adjust it onto this edge here. And then I'll bring in some of this grass plant here, and then just kind of adjust it to the ground. And then I'll just kind of copy and paste a few of these here, again, to kind of surround the scene and make it filled with a little bit more character or a little bit more life. And then I think I actually want to go with the cherry blossom. I think that is a little bit different. You know, you won't really find obviously a cherry blossom at the bottom of the ocean. And so I think that kind of adds more of a whimsical element to it, or of a more of a stylized look. And so I think that will kind of be a really good addition to our temple here. So we'll just kind of throw this off to the right side. And the reason why I chose the right side here is we do have those spotlights coming in from the top right. So sometimes Even getting the spotlight to go through the tree could create a pretty cool effect here as well. So we'll leave the tree on the right side here, and then what I'll do is just kind of adjust the scene. And then again, just copy and paste some of this grass here, and then I'm just really just again trying to fill this up as much as possible. Okay, and then next up, what I'll do is I'll bring in a little bit more of this ivy here. So again, to make it simple, I'm just going to copy and paste. I'm going to rotate it here. And then just lay it across the side wall here. And then to get a better idea of what we're looking at, I'm just going to bring up the Redshift render view here. And then hit play, and then pop us into our camera. And so immediately you can see what effects that has. So you can see that the lights that I was talking about is hitting some of the trees. So you get some nice highlights there. You do have some of the tree that is not lit up, so you get some nice kind of mid-tones and a darker look as well too. And then you could kind of see some of the shadows that the tree is casting onto the temple. So that looks pretty cool. We'll always kind of play around with our lights here. So as I increase the exposure, you can kind of see a little bit more light being pumped into the scene. And then I'm just going to bring in another spotlight here. And then just kind of see if I can, and then see if I can bring in another light source here. And then I'm just going to increase the exposure. And then change the color slightly here. And then I'm just going to add in another gobo to kind of help break up some of that lights, and then to also texturize it a little bit. And then if I go into the dome lights, as I increase the intensity, it is a little too much, so I'll just drop it back to 1 here. And then with this, we're pretty much, about to wrap up the scene here. But really, again, with underwater looks, I mean, I feel like light can really make or break the scene. And so making sure that we do have some good light sources and we're kind of highlighting what we want to show is extremely important, especially too with having so much dark material. Making sure we do have some lights so it's a little bit more apparent on what the viewer is trying to look at is ideal. So And then with this other spotlight here, what I'm going to do is just rotate it so it's kind of highlighting again aspect of the temple, but we're still kind of hiding some of the temple so we can get that nice contrast as well. I'll pump in a little bit more blue here just to see exactly what it will look like with a little bit more blue in here, just because with our other lights have a somewhat of a warmer tone, and we really need to control how much warm light is coming into the scene, and then how much more of a cool look as well. And so we want to make sure that, especially with underwater, that cool is a little bit more prominent than the warmness, especially at the bottom of the ocean. It's I would imagine it's not too not too warm down there. So, and then again, I'm just going to play around with this ivy here and then just kind of adjust it to our temple here. And yeah, that's pretty much it for this scene here. I mean, we can always just add in a ton of other options as well, or just tons of other elements. But as I'm slowly adding more and more assets, I can feel how much more sluggish the render view is running. And so I think this would be a good time to kind of stop here and do a few renders here and see exactly what our scene looks like. And then besides rendering out a few images here, we can always go in and adjust it with some sort of LUT or some sort of filter to really kind of push again a specific look or a specific style. And so with this, similar to some of the other videos I've done, like the Art Deco or even the ship as well too, what I wanted to do with this is really kind of create a scene that was dynamic, but again, something that was beginner friendly and really didn't involve any sort of modeling at all. So again, with this, I'm just trying to show you guys that it is a little bit easier than you would think to kind of create more of a dynamic scene. Now, this for sure isn't like the highest detail or the the best looking. We can always go in and really play around with it. And so with most of the time, if you can invest more time and add a little bit more detail into the scene, or even add different elements, it's gonna just be more and more dynamic as you kind of play around with it. So again, the purpose for this video was to just show you guys that with all the tools and resources out there, you guys can make something that is really cool without having to know any sort of modeling techniques or have any sort of pre-existing knowledge of how to kind of set up a dynamic scene. So sometimes when you're just starting out with Cinema4D or any sort of 3D software program, just even like making a scene in general is a lot of fun. So if we can not be attached to the overall result or try and control what exactly it looks like, and we kind of just flow with it, the scene kind of just builds itself as you play around with it. So But other than that, that was pretty much it for this one. Please let me know what you guys think of this. If you want to see more of this, let me know down in the comment section. If you liked it, please shoot up a like as well. Other than that, that's the end of the video. You guys have a good rest of your day, and I'll see you on the next one.